You've been told fruit is healthy, but what if one common fruit is quietly setting you up for a stroke while you sleep? In today's video, we're going to uncover the truth about a popular fruit that millions eat daily, not realizing it can spike blood pressure, increase inflammation, and even thicken the blood. If you care about your brain, heart, and metabolic health, you need to hear this before your next bite. High fructose fruits, while often celebrated for their natural sweetness and vitamin content, can have a surprisingly negative effect on blood pressure and overall cardiovascular health, especially in individuals with underlying metabolic imbalances such as insulin resistance or fatty liver. Unlike glucose, which is metabolized by every cell in the body, fructose has a unique metabolic pathway. It is almost exclusively processed in the liver, and when consumed in large quantities, even from seemingly healthy fruits like ripe bananas, mangoes, grapes, or dates, fructose can create a silent storm inside your body that directly affects your vascular system. This metabolic overload forces the liver to convert excess fructose into fat, particularly triglycerides, which not only contributes to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but also increases circulating blood lipids and uric acid, both major risk factors for hypertension. The problem becomes more pronounced when fructose consumption is habitual or concentrated in a single sitting, such as when eating large portions of fruit or drinking fruit juices. Fructose metabolism consumes ATP rapidly, leading to an increase in AMP and the subsequent production of uric acid as a metabolic byproduct. Elevated uric acid is far from harmless. It directly inhibits nitric oxide in the blood vessels, a molecule critical for maintaining vascular flexibility and lowering blood pressure. When nitric oxide levels drop, blood vessels become stiffer and narrower, which in turn increases vascular resistance and forces the heart to pump harder. Over time, this results in chronic hypertension and elevates the risk of vascular events like strokes or heart attacks. Moreover, the body's hormonal response to fructose exacerbates the issue. Unlike glucose, fructose does not trigger insulin or leptin in the same way, which means it doesn't produce a strong satiety signal. This can lead to overeating and excessive caloric intake, often without the person realizing it. Over time, this promotes weight gain, especially visceral fat accumulation around organs, a key driver of systemic inflammation and blood pressure dysregulation. The paradox is that many people turn to fruits when they are trying to eat clean or lose weight, not knowing that an overload of high fructose fruit could be silently working against their cardiovascular health goals. And one of the most misleading practices is the overconsumption of dried fruits like raisins, dried mango, and figs. These are extremely concentrated sources of fructose due to the removal of water, meaning you consume much more sugar per bite compared to their fresh counterparts. Just a small handful can contain more sugar than a candy bar, and the glycemic load is even higher. In this dehydrated form, fructose hits the liver fast and hard, creating a more dramatic spike in uric acid and triglyceride production. That immediate hepatic stress has ripple effects throughout the vascular system. It's like giving your liver a metabolic punch while simultaneously depriving your arteries of the relaxation signals they need to function properly. Another overlooked danger is the impact on the kidneys. As uric acid rises from chronic fructose intake, the kidneys work harder to excrete it, which can cause long-term damage and reduce their ability to regulate sodium. When sodium handling becomes inefficient, blood volume and pressure both increase. It's a chain reaction. Fructose increases uric acid suppresses nitric oxide, and impaired kidney function compounds the blood pressure problem. For someone genetically predisposed to hypertension or already struggling with prediabetes, this trifecta is like throwing gasoline on a smoldering fire. Even more concerning is the timing of fruit consumption. Eating high fructose fruits at night when the body's insulin sensitivity is lower and metabolism slows increases the chances that fructose will be converted directly into fat without the buffer of physical activity or nutrient demand. During sleep, the liver should be engaged in detoxification and repair, but instead, it's metabolizing sugar, increasing uric acid, and altering lipid profiles. This disruption to the circadian rhythm of metabolic repair contributes to poor sleep quality, early morning blood pressure spikes, and worsened metabolic function over time. The takeaway isn't to demonize all fruits, but rather to understand the difference between fructose-heavy fruits and low-sugar, fiber-rich options like berries, avocados, or lemons. These support health, do not overwhelm the liver, and help regulate blood pressure through their potassium content and antioxidant profile. The problem is dosage, timing, and context. Most people are unaware that fruit sugar behaves very differently from table sugar, and that the so-called healthy snack they're eating might be the very thing keeping their blood pressure elevated. Understanding the metabolic fate of fructose and its role in blood pressure regulation is essential in reversing hypertension naturally. When managed poorly, even natural sugars can become harmful agents that stress your heart, liver, kidneys, and brain. Real health isn't just about eating what's natural. It's about understanding what your body can metabolically handle and when. Insulin resistance is often talked about in the context of weight gain and type 2 diabetes, but its silent and more devastating consequence is the massive increase in stroke risk that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. To understand how insulin resistance triggers strokes, you need to look beyond just blood sugar levels and dig deeper into the chain reaction it sets off in your vascular system, your brain, and your hormonal balance. Insulin is not just about sugar control. It's also a growth hormone, a fat storage hormone, and the signaling hormone that impacts inflammation, blood pressure, and the inner lining of your blood vessels, known as the endothelium. And when your cells become resistant to insulin, the pancreas is forced to pump out more of it, leading to a state of hyperinsulinemia. Chronically high levels of insulin in your bloodstream, which becomes a toxic inflammatory bath for your arteries. This chronically high insulin starts to damage the endothelium, the inner walls of your blood vessels. The endothelium's primary job is to produce nitric oxide, a gas that keeps your arteries relaxed and flexible. But when insulin is high, nitric oxide production is suppressed. Without enough nitric oxide, your blood vessels become stiff and narrow. This is the root of high blood pressure, and high blood pressure is the single greatest modifiable risk factor for a stroke. At the same time, insulin resistance creates a perfect storm by increasing the production of clotting factors like fibrinogen and promoting platelet aggregation. This thickens the blood and sets the stage for blood clots that can travel to the brain and cause ischemic strokes, the most common type of stroke. Beyond the vascular damage, insulin resistance also feeds into the brain's own glucose metabolism. The brain is a glucose-hungry organ, but in the presence of chronic insulin resistance, its ability to metabolize glucose is impaired. This leads to energy deficits in brain tissue, increasing the risk of neural inflammation, cellular death, and cognitive dysfunction, all of which raise the risk for not only strokes, but for post-stroke complications and poor recovery. Insulin resistance also plays a direct role in increasing the volume of visceral fat around the organs, especially in the abdomen. This fat isn't just sitting there passively, it secretes pro-anabolic cytokines like IL-6 and TNF-alpha, which amplifies systemic inflammation and further impair insulin sensitivity, creating a dangerous feedback loop that targets the arteries, including the carotid arteries leading to the brain. Moreover, insulin resistance has a profound effect on your lipid profile. It lowers your HDL, the good cholesterol, raises your triglycerides, and increases the formation of small, dense LDL particles. These are the most atherogenic forms of cholesterol. Small, dense LDL particles easily penetrate the damaged endothelium and oxidize, triggering plaque formation and hardening of the arteries, a condition known as atherosclerosis. When these plaques rupture, they can cause an immediate clot, which then cuts off blood supply to the brain, resulting in a stroke. And unlike large, buoyant LDL, which is relatively inert, these small, dense LDL particles are inflammatory and dangerous, and their presence is almost always linked to insulin resistance, not dietary cholesterol. Insulin resistance also affects another hormone that plays a vital role in stroke prevention, adiponectin. Adiponectin is anti-inflammatory and improves insulin sensitivity, but when you are insulin resistant, your levels of adiponectin plummet. This further worsens inflammation and vascular dysfunction. At the same time, insulin resistance leads to increased sodium retention in the kidneys, which contributes to fluid retention and elevated blood volume, further increasing blood pressure. Over time, this damages the fragile blood vessels in the brain, making them more susceptible to rupture, which is the hallmark of hemorrhagic strokes. So whether it's an ischemic stroke due to a clot or a hemorrhagic stroke due to a burst vessel, insulin resistance plays a key foundational role in increasing risk for both. And yet, most people walk around completely unaware that they are insulin resistant. They might not even have high fasting blood sugar yet, but they could already have high fasting insulin, elevated triglycerides, low HDL, and rising waist circumference, all early signs that their metabolism is inflamed and stroke risk is climbing. This is why relying on a basic glucose test isn't enough. A proper evaluation of metabolic health includes fasting insulin, HOMA-IR, and waist to hip ratio. Catching insulin resistance early can make the difference between vibrant health and a life-altering stroke. Lifestyle factors such as chronic stress, poor sleep, frequent snacking, and low muscle mass all contribute to worsening insulin resistance. Conversely, interventions like intermittent fasting, a low-carb whole food diet, high-intensity resistance training, and sleep optimization can restore insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, and protect the arteries from stroke-causing damage. So while most people think of stroke as something that just happens to the elderly or the genetically unlucky, the truth is that insulin resistance is silently preparing the ground for that event years, even decades in advance. Understanding and reversing insulin resistance is not just about avoiding diabetes, it's about protecting your brain, your heart, and your life. Most people have heard of glycemic index, but few truly understand the deeper and more important measure of glycemic load and why it's a critical factor in determining how your body responds to fruit, carbohydrates, and even so-called healthy foods. Glycemic index, GI, tells you how quickly a carbohydrate turns into sugar in your bloodstream, but glycemic load, GL, goes further. It takes into account both how fast the sugar hits your blood and how much sugar is actually in the portion you're consuming. That distinction makes all the difference, especially when we're looking at stroke risk, insulin resistance, and inflammation, because a food might have a high GI but a very small carbohydrate amount, meaning it won't significantly affect your blood sugar. On the flip side, a food might have a moderate GI, but if it's eaten in large quantities or contains a heavy dose of sugar, the glycemic load becomes dangerously high, and that's where metabolic chaos begins. Let's take watermelon as an example. It has a relatively high glycemic index, but because it's mostly water and low in carbohydrates, the glycemic load is actually modest if consumed in a reasonable portion. Compare that to something like overripe bananas, grapes, or dried fruits. These often have both a high GI and a high carbohydrate content, meaning their glycemic load is significantly higher and they can spike your insulin and blood sugar rapidly. When that happens, your body enters a hyperglycemic state followed by a reactive insulin dump to bring blood sugar back down. Over time, these constant sugar-insulin roller coasters wear out your insulin receptors, leading to insulin resistance. And once you become insulin resistant, you're not just dealing with fatigue, brain fog, or stubborn belly fat. You're now increasing your risk for stroke, heart disease, and accelerated aging of the arteries and brain. This is especially dangerous when people believe that just because something is natural or fruit-based, it must be healthy. But the glycemic load of modern fruits, many of which have been bred for extreme sweetness, can rival or even exceed that of junk foods. A large mango or a couple handfuls of grapes can deliver the same glycemic load as a donut. And when these high gel fruits are consumed late at night without any protein or fat to buffer them, they cause a glucose spike while you're at rest, which is even worse because at night your metabolism slows down, your insulin sensitivity drops, and your body is more prone to fat storage and inflammation. Blood sugar volatility during sleep increases cortisol, raises heart rate variability, and disrupts deep sleep, all of which further damage your vascular system. The glycemic load concept also applies beyond fruit. It's relevant for starchy vegetables like potatoes, grains like white rice, and processed cereals. Many of these foods have a deceptively mild taste and may seem harmless, but they release a large bolus of glucose into your bloodstream, triggering a sharp insulin response. If this happens occasionally, the body can handle it. But if it's part of your daily diet, especially in combination with stress, poor sleep, and inactivity, it becomes a chronic metabolic insult. That chronic insult builds up over time, damaging the endothelial lining of blood vessels, promoting the formation of arterial plaque, and increasing the likelihood of clot formation, setting the stage for an ischemic stroke. People with prediabetes or insulin resistance must be particularly cautious. In this group, the body's already struggling to respond to carbohydrates appropriately. A high glycemic load, meal or snack in these individuals creates greater glucose variability, increased oxidative stress, and more free radical production. That oxidative stress doesn't just affect the pancreas. It travels to the brain, where it weakens neurons, lowers neuroplasticity, and increases the risk for small vessel cerebrovascular disease. It can also reduce blood flow to the brain, contribute to vascular dementia, and impair memory and decision making. So when people dismiss the idea of glycemic load as just a blood sugar issue, they're missing the full picture. This is a whole body, whole brain issue. To manage glycemic load, it's not just about cutting carbs. It's about being strategic with what kind of carbs, how much, when you eat them, and what they're paired with. For example, pairing a small serving of fruit with protein and fat, like Greek yogurt or nuts, can dramatically reduce the glycemic load of the entire meal. Eating carbs earlier in the day, when insulin sensitivity is higher, is another key strategy. And focusing on low glycemic load options like berries, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, and avocado can provide nutrients without spiking blood sugar. Glycemic load isn't just for diabetics. It's a key metabolic marker that influences everything from stroke and cardiovascular health to energy, fat burning, mood, and longevity. It reflects how well your body handles sugar and how close you are to the tipping point of inflammation, insulin resistance, and metabolic breakdown. So understanding and respecting glycemic load may be one of the simplest but most powerful nutritional principles for protecting your brain, your blood vessels, and your future. Most people eat fruit with the belief that it's a health food, packed with vitamins, fiber, and antioxidants, but what often goes unrecognized is how the natural sugars in fruit, especially when consumed in excess or in the wrong context, are metabolized by the body and can rapidly be converted into fat, particularly in the liver. The sugar found in fruit is primarily fructose, a unique carbohydrate that behaves differently in the body than glucose. Unlike glucose, which can be used by nearly every cell in the body as fuel, fructose must be processed almost entirely by the liver. When you consume fruit, especially modern, overly sweet varieties or dried fruits, the liver is flooded with fructose. If your glycogen stores, your liver's sugar storage capacity, are already full and you're not burning a lot of energy due to a sedentary lifestyle or frequent eating, your body has no choice but to convert that excess fructose into fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. This means new fat creation, and it's the body's way of dealing with a sugar surplus it cannot immediately use. This conversion of fruit sugar into fat doesn't just impact your waistline. It primarily leads to increased fat in the liver, also known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, which is becoming alarmingly common even among people who don't consume alcohol. And here's the catch. This liver fat doesn't just sit there. It's metabolically active. It interferes with insulin signaling, increases systemic inflammation, and contributes to insulin resistance, which is the root cause of many modern diseases, including type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and stroke. While a whole fruit eaten occasionally and mindfully won't harm most people, constant snacking on fruit, drinking fruit juices, or consuming smoothies with several servings of high-sugar fruits like bananas, mangoes, pineapples, and grapes is a metabolic trap that feels healthy but behaves very differently once inside the body. This process becomes even more dangerous when fructose is consumed outside the context of whole food, like in juices or dried fruit where the fiber is removed or diminished. Fiber is nature's way of slowing down sugar absorption, giving the liver time to process it gradually. But remove that fiber and you've essentially created a natural sugar bomb. Even a seemingly innocent glass of orange juice can contain as much sugar as a soda. And here's where people are misled. The fruit sugar may be natural, but its metabolic impact is just as damaging when overconsumed. The liver doesn't care whether the sugar came from a peach or a Pepsi. It sees sugar and it responds accordingly by converting the excess into triglycerides and fat storage. Adding to this issue is the fact that most people are already in a state of sugar overload from refined carbohydrates, processed foods, and frequent eating. The liver is rarely given the opportunity to rest, repair, or deplete its glycogen stores. So when fruit is consumed on top of that baseline, even in the form of snacks or so-called healthy desserts, it often leads to an accumulation of visceral fat, the dangerous kind, that wraps around your organs and increases your risk for metabolic syndrome. Over time, this fat buildup creates hormonal disruption, elevates estrogen in both men and women, decreases testosterone, and leads to an inflammatory environment that accelerates aging, reduces energy, and impairs cognitive function. There's also a circadian element to all this. The timing of when you eat fruit matters. When consumed late in the evening, the body is in its least insulin-sensitive state. That means more that fruit sugar will be converted into fat instead of being burned as fuel. The metabolism slows down, your muscle cells become less responsive to insulin, and fat oxidation declines. So a healthy bowl of fruit before bed is, for many people, a silent contributor to liver fat accumulation and morning fatigue. It's especially problematic for those over 30 as metabolic flexibility begins to decline and the body loses its ability to buffer these sugar surges. Modern fruit has also been bred for sweetness over nutrition. Wild fruits used to be smaller, more fibrous, and far less sugary. But today, many store-bought fruits contain a high ratio of sugar to fiber, especially when overripe. Bananas, for example, increase in sugar content the more they ripen. What begins as starch converts to simple sugar, and that overripe banana that seems harmless becomes a fructose-rich metabolic stressor. When eaten regularly, especially without balancing it with protein or healthy fats, it contributes to a constant state of lipogenesis. Your body is storing more fat even while you believe you're eating healthy. The bigger issue lies in the metabolic context in which fruit is consumed. If you're insulin sensitive, active, and metabolically flexible, a moderate amount of fruit isn't likely to harm you. But if you're already struggling with weight gain, blood sugar issues, fatty liver, or poor energy, then stored fruit sugars, especially from high fructose fruits, juices, and dried forms, are more likely to be shuttled directly into fat storage. And that sets the stage for a whole cascade of health problems down the road. That's why understanding the difference between natural and metabolically appropriate is key to making intelligent nutritional choices that protect your liver, balance your hormones, and reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. Blood clotting is a vital physiological process that prevents excessive bleeding when we experience an injury, but when this mechanism becomes overactive or dysregulated, it can lead to serious consequences like deep vein thrombosis, stroke, or heart attack. The triggers that initiate abnormal blood clotting are often silent, cumulative, and driven by metabolic, hormonal, and dietary imbalances that go unnoticed until it's too late. One of the most underestimated causes is chronic inflammation, which can quietly damage the lining of blood vessels, creating tiny fissures and prompting the body to form clots as a protective measure. This is where poor dietary choices come into play. Highly refined carbohydrates, seed oils rich in omega-6 fatty acids, and processed sugars all contribute to an inflammatory state that activates clotting factors like fibrinogen and platelets. When the inner walls of the arteries, called the endothelium, are inflamed, they lose their smooth Teflon-like surface and instead become sticky and prone to trapping cholesterol, immune cells, and fibrin, which can coalesce into dangerous clots. Another common trigger is insulin resistance, a condition in which cells become less responsive to insulin, forcing the pancreas to produce more of it. Insulin is not just a blood sugar regulator, it's also a growth and storage hormone that influences coagulation. Elevated insulin levels promote increased platelet aggregation, meaning your blood cells are more likely to clump together. It also reduces fibrinolysis, the process through which your body breaks down clots. So not only are you forming more clots, but your body is also less capable of dissolving them. This is especially critical in individuals with metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, or type 2 diabetes, where the risk of cardiovascular complications skyrockets due to this imbalance. It's not simply about sugar intake. This is a systemic hormonal dysfunction, and it silently sets the stage for life-threatening events like pulmonary embolisms or ischemic strokes. Dehydration is another often overlooked trigger. Your blood is mostly water, and when you're chronically dehydrated, which many people are, especially the elderly, your blood becomes thicker and more viscous. This increases the likelihood of clots forming in areas of reduced circulation, such as the legs or the lower extremities, during long periods of immobility. Combine that with a sedentary lifestyle and the absence of muscle contraction that helps pump blood back to the heart, and you've created a perfect storm for clot development. Long flights, prolonged desk work, or even extended bed rest all heighten this risk unless countered by hydration and regular movement. Estrogen dominance, whether from synthetic hormone replacement therapy, birth control pills, or even xenoestrogens from plastics and cosmetics, can increase clotting risk significantly. Estrogen promotes the synthesis of clotting proteins in the liver, which is why women on certain forms of hormone therapy or those with conditions like PCOS may experience an elevated risk of venous thromboembolism. This is compounded when paired with smoking, sedentary behavior, or poor liver function. The liver plays a key role in clearing excess hormones and detoxifying the blood. When burdened by poor diet, alcohol, or exposure to environmental toxins, its ability to regulate clotting factors becomes compromised. Nutrient imbalances also contribute to hypercoagulability. Low levels of vitamin K2, which is essential for directing calcium to the bones and away from arteries, can result in calcified, rigid blood vessels that promote turbulent blood flow and encourage clot formation. Vitamin K2 also helps regulate clotting by balancing the activity of vitamin K1, which drives the production of clotting proteins. Too much K1 without enough K2 can tip the scale toward unwanted clotting. Similarly, deficiencies in magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, and B vitamins, especially B6, B12, and folate, can result in elevated homocysteine levels, a known independent risk factor for arterial clots and cardiovascular disease. These nutrients are critical in keeping blood thin and arteries elastic. Medications are another hidden factor. Many people take over-the-counter or prescribed medications without understanding their impact on clotting. Certain antidepressants, diuretics, decongestants, and even painkillers like NSAIDs can affect platelet activity and alter the vascular tone. The same goes for anabolic steroids, which are known to increase red blood cell count and blood thickness, making clots more likely. Even supplements like calcium, when taken in excess or without balancing cofactors like magnesium and K2, can contribute to calcified arterial plaques and blood stagnation. Lastly, infections and immune responses can also tip the balance toward clotting. This was dramatically illustrated during the COVID-19 pandemic, where many patients experienced blood clots as part of an exaggerated immune response. Viral and bacterial infections trigger cytokine release, which in turn activates the clotting cascade. Inflammatory markers like CRP, C-reactive protein, IL-6, and TNF-alpha all act as signals that direct the body to begin patching perceived damage in the vascular system. Unfortunately, in this heightened immune state, the risk of forming large obstructive clots increases dramatically. This clotting phenomenon isn't unique to COVID-19. It can happen in any scenario where the immune system goes into overdrive, such as autoimmune flare-ups, bacterial sepsis, or even after surgeries. Fruit juice is often marketed as a health food, a convenient and refreshing way to get your vitamins, but the reality is far more dangerous, especially when it comes to metabolic health, insulin regulation, and stroke risk. Unlike whole fruit, which contains fiber to buffer the absorption of sugars, fruit juice is essentially a concentrated liquid sugar bomb, stripped of its natural fiber and condensed into a form that enters the bloodstream rapidly, overwhelming the body's hormonal system. What many people don't realize is that fruit juice behaves almost identically to soda inside the body, especially when it comes to fructose metabolism. The liver is the only organ capable of processing fructose efficiently, and when overloaded, especially from a high intake of fruit juice, it begins to convert this sugar into triglycerides, increasing fat storage in the liver and surrounding organs, a process that contributes to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and systemic inflammation, both of which are early markers for stroke and cardiovascular events. This rapid influx of sugar into the bloodstream also spikes blood glucose and, more dangerously, insulin. Over time, repeated insulin spikes from high fructose drinks like fruit juice lead to insulin resistance, a condition where the body's cells become desensitized to insulin's signal, forcing the pancreas to produce more just to handle the same amount of sugar. This hormonal imbalance doesn't just lead to weight gain, it directly disrupts vascular function, stiffens arteries, and increases clotting risk. Insulin is not simply a storage hormone. It is also involved in cell growth and fluid retention, both of which can thicken the blood and raise blood pressure, two of the primary risk factors for stroke. Furthermore, insulin resistance is closely tied to chronic inflammation, and inflammation damages the inner lining of blood vessels, making them more prone to rupture or blockage. One of the biggest dangers of fruit juice is how deceptively healthy it appears. Labels like 100% juice, no added sugar, or organic lead people to believe they are making a smart choice, when in reality they are consuming the equivalent of multiple servings of fruit in a single glass. For example, it takes 3 to 4 oranges to make one small glass of orange juice, but no one would sit down and eat 4 oranges in under a minute. Yet drinking the juice takes only seconds, sending a flood of fructose into the system without the natural satiety or digestion slowdown provided by the fruit's pulp and skin. Apple juice, grape juice, and even green juices that are mostly apple-based fall into this same trap, delivering excessive sugar doses that are metabolically damaging over time. Many people consume these drinks daily with breakfast, unknowingly beginning their day with an insulin spike and setting the stage for an energy crash, hunger pangs, and hormone disruption just a few hours later. Even for those without diagnosed metabolic issues, the damage is cumulative. The repeated consumption of juice, especially from childhood, sets the groundwork for a lifetime of poor metabolic flexibility. For children in particular, fruit juice is a leading contributor to early onset fatty liver, childhood obesity, and the beginning stages of insulin resistance. By the time they reach adulthood, these individuals often face prediabetes, high blood pressure, and a chronic dependence on sugar to maintain energy levels. This pattern is not about moderation. It's about understanding the metabolic consequences of habitual behaviors and how they alter hormonal and vascular health over time. Another overlooked issue is the glycemic load of fruit juice. While some fruits may have a moderate glycemic index when eaten whole, juicing them dramatically increases the glycemic load, the total impact on blood sugar. This means a single serving of juice can spike blood sugar to dangerous levels, particularly in older adults, sedentary individuals, or those with poor mitochondrial function. These spikes not only wear down the pancreas, but also damage the endothelial cells lining the arteries, causing microtears that the body attempts to repair using cholesterol and clotting factors, which can build up into dangerous plaques. When these plaques rupture or become unstable, the risk of clot formation and consequently stroke increases sharply. In addition to sugars, many store-bought juices contain oxidized preservatives, pasteurized enzymes, and in some cases even trace contaminants from packaging or storage. Pasteurization, while designed to kill harmful bacteria, also destroys many of the beneficial phytonutrients and enzymes that might otherwise offer antioxidant protection. This means you're not getting the immune-boosting anti-scimitar benefits of raw, fresh fruit. It's just the sugar, the calories, and the metabolic consequences. Some juice companies even use concentrates or natural flavors that further deviate from the nutritional profile of real fruit, yet the product is still marketed as healthy or refreshing. For individuals already dealing with high blood pressure, clotting issues, migraines, or cognitive decline, fruit juice acts as a silent antagonist, exacerbating underlying conditions without obvious symptoms. Unlike candy or soda, which people intuitively know to avoid, fruit juice wears a mask of health, making it one of the most dangerous contributors to metabolic disease because people consume it with confidence. Its sugar content, lack of fiber, and rapid absorption rate create a biochemical cascade that leads not to nourishment, but to oxidative stress, vascular inflammation, and insulin dysregulation, all of which increase the risk for cerebrovascular incidents like stroke. When it comes to nuts, not all are created equal, and while many popular options are marketed as health foods, they often hide behind a veil of clever branding while delivering heavy doses of anti-nutrients, inflammatory omega-6 fats, and hidden toxins like mold or seed oils. Yet, the good news is this: better alternatives absolutely exist, and these options not only preserve muscle health, but also actively work to reduce inflammation, stabilize blood sugar, and support hormonal balance. The first step in choosing better nuts is shifting the focus from convenience and flavor-coated options to nutrient density, digestibility, and metabolic harmony. For example, instead of reaching for roasted, salted, or glazed peanuts, one of the most allergenic and mold-prone nuts available, opt for raw, sprouted macadamia nuts. These are naturally low in omega-6 fats, rich in monounsaturated fats, and far less likely to contain mycotoxins or gut-disrupting lectins. Macadamias also support ketosis, making them a perfect option for those practicing intermittent fasting or low-carb eating to preserve lean muscle mass and metabolic flexibility. Another superior alternative is the Brazil nut, but only in moderation. Brazil nuts are a powerhouse of selenium, a trace mineral essential for thyroid function, antioxidant defense, and testosterone production. Just 1 or 2 Brazil nuts per day can meet your selenium needs, which in turn helps regulate metabolism, muscle protein synthesis, and immune resilience. However, overconsumption should be avoided due to selenium's potency. This highlights the deeper truth. The goal is not just finding safe nuts, but finding strategic nuts, those that fill a nutrient gap or support a specific function without overburdening the body's detoxification systems or increasing inflammation. Walnuts, for instance, are often considered healthy, but they carry a high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which can fuel chronic inflammation when eaten in excess. A better approach would be to pair a small handful of soaked walnuts with omega-3 rich foods like wild salmon or flaxseed to balance the fatty acid profile, or simply substitute with pili nuts, which are incredibly high in magnesium and extremely low in carbs. Pecans also deserve mention. Though slightly higher in omega-6 than macadamias, pecans are rich in polyphenols, manganese, and plant sterols that help lower LDL cholesterol, stabilize blood sugar, and protect against oxidative stress. They can be a good occasional snack for individuals working to support cardiovascular health and manage insulin sensitivity. The key is to consume them raw or dry roasted without seed oils and in small amounts, because the metabolic impact of nuts often depends more on quality and quantity than the nut itself. Sprouting or soaking these nuts before consumption further reduces anti-nutrients like phytic acid and enzyme inhibitors, improving digestibility and nutrient absorption, which is particularly important for those with compromised gut health or nutrient deficiencies due to age malabsorption. Tiger nuts, despite their name, are not actually nuts, but tubers. They're high in resistant starch, a prebiotic fiber that feeds healthy gut bacteria, and offer a crunchy, satisfying alternative for those with nut allergies or autoimmune conditions. Their unique carbohydrate profile slows glucose absorption, reduces sugar spikes, and supports colon health, which in turn improves nutrient uptake and reduces systemic inflammation. These kinds of alternatives often go overlooked because they're not stocked in mainstream snack aisles or plastered across health magazine covers, but they represent the shift toward functionally intelligent eating, where each food choice is leveraged for its biochemical impact, not just its taste or trendiness. Chia and flax seeds, while technically seeds and not nuts, also serve as smart muscle-preserving additions. They are rich in plant-based omega-3s, especially ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, and packed with fiber, which slows digestion, supports satiety, and improves glycemic control. Their anti-inflammatory effect works in favor of those trying to reverse insulin resistance, lose visceral fat, or recover from overtraining or sarcopenia. Ground flaxseed in particular has lignans, plant compounds with estrogen balancing effects that can be crucial for hormonal health in both men and women, especially during middle age. Incorporating a tablespoon of ground flax into a protein shake or using chia seeds as a thickener for low-carb puddings or smoothies is a way to harness their benefits without triggering the digestive distress that high volumes of nuts can cause. What makes these alternatives truly better is not just their nutrient profile, but the way they interact with the body's hormonal, digestive, and muscular systems. Instead of promoting inflammation, they calm it. Instead of spiking insulin, they regulate it. Instead of blocking nutrient absorption, they enhance it. And instead of overloading the liver with oxidized fats and mold, they offer clean, bioavailable fuel that aligns with how the body was designed to thrive. These better alternatives support longevity, muscle integrity, brain clarity, and gut resilience, not through hype or flavoring, but through biochemical intelligence and alignment with human physiology.